Welcome to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. Legal issues simplified through real client stories and real-world experiences. Creating simplicity in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to another episode of Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael Byrd.
Thanks, Brad. As a business and healthcare law firm, details matter. This season's theme is Zoom In. Once we know our big picture vision or strategy, we have to roll up our sleeves to get the work done. With each episode this season, we'll have our typical stories and make sure we talk about specific actions to focus on for 2022.
Yeah, and Michael, I'm excited for today's episode. We have a guest joining us with a really cool background, coming from a humble start to becoming an orthopedic physician. But before we bring in today's special guest, I thought I want to ask you a question. I saw this documentary recently, and it blew me away. Have you heard of this documentary called Fyre, The Greatest Party That Never Happened?
Oh, yeah. It's a massive train wreck. And believe it or not, I don't know if you knew this, but 2 of the streaming services came out with their own version of the Fyre Festival story right next to each other. So they were competing kind of versions of it, and they both were dumpster fires.
That's awesome. Well, for those who don't know, Fyre was promoted as a high-end music festival on a tropical island, where it was promoted by these Instagram social media influencers, and they sold like 8,000 tickets because all these high-end musical lineup was going to be there with luxury accommodations, gourmet dining. Some of these VIP packages sold for like $12,000.
Yeah, we should have talked about this during the season that we did dumpster fires as a theme, because that's what this was. There was no luxury villas, no gourmet meals. In fact, those who attended only received boxed plain cheese sandwiches and basically FEMA tents as their accommodation. And it quickly became a major disaster. All the artists backed out of the event, and they started to experience problems related to security, food, and medical services.
Yeah. And so eventually, for those who don't know, you can pause this part and fast forward for 20 seconds, but there is a Netflix out there. But the organizers eventually did plead guilty to committing wire fraud. And then one of the organizers, while he was out on bail, got busted for defrauding people in another scheme. He went to jail for like 6 years, had a forfeit like $26 million, and they've been subject to a whole bunch of different lawsuits for defrauding these people.
So what does a fraudulent musical festival have to do with today's show?
Okay, so while I was preparing for today's show for our guest, I started thinking about the deals that he has seen in his lifetime and the importance of planning and determining, is this a real deal? And sometimes it doesn't matter who's saying it, how good it sounds, how true it sounds. Sometimes if it's too good to be true, that just may be the case.
All right. Well, let's bring Dominique Nickson, MD, on. Dominique is a board-certified orthopedic surgeon and foot pain specialist, providing services to patients at Next Step Orthopedics. He offers treatment for a variety of sports medicine conditions. Dominique received his doctorate in medicine with a special emphasis on orthopedic surgery from the Case Western Reserve School of Medicine in Cleveland, Ohio. Did his residency at State University of New York in Brooklyn. Dominique did his fellowship training in foot and ankle training at Baylor University Medical Center in Dallas. He is married to Michelle and a longtime friend and client of the firm. And when Dominique does have free time, whatever that means, he is spending it with his son's baseball team and traveling. Dominique, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Dominique, you and I we have worked together since 2011, and during that time, we've had some great adventures together. But for our audience, let's take a big step back and let's start before you and I even met. And why don't you give the audience some of your background? Where did you grow up?
I'm originally from Indianapolis, Indiana, North Side.
So tell us about North Side.
I would say my neighborhood was, I guess you'd call it, blue collar neighborhood. Lots of good people there. kind of gave me the foundation to do what I do today. I think it allows me to relate to everyday people.
That's awesome.
How did you decide to become a doctor?
Well, fortunately, I got into a advanced biology class in high school, and my high school teacher named Mr. Russell. He was just this very old, dynamic teacher who just made biology and medicine seem like the most fascinating thing in the world. And the class was very, very competitive, and I liked the energy of competing against the best students, and it kind of led me down the path to Washington University.
Wow. So now you're a board certified orthopedic surgeon, and you have many healthcare and non-healthcare opportunities that are offered to you. And we'd love, just because of, we have stories connected to our episodes, and obviously without releasing any names, love to hear from you, a healthcare deal that you wish you could take back and why.
I think that there are probably several, but one that comes to mind is a deal that we did early on upon my arrival to Dallas with an imaging facility. The deal, it started off well. I was invested into the non-federal portion of the program, and eventually there were attempts by the group to reorganize it and to kind of do a sleight of hand that I wasn't comfortable with. And fortunately, I brought it back to Brad and said, "Hey, take a look at this," and essentially he advised me to get out of the deal.
That's a fair assessment. And so, like, let Dominique, just take either another step into the details. When this, and so for our audience, this season's theme is Zoom In, and so for us, we really want to get into the details as to what drives certain actions. And based on, as you said, you have for better or for worse, a plethora of healthcare transactions that you have seen, since you've become a physician. Tell us some of the things, some of the terms and conditions that you like to examine now, based on what you've learned.
Sure. I think that the first and foremost, when I look at any deal, I try to see if it makes sense with what I do. Is it an opportunity that I can support and that is in line with kind of my business model and kind of my ethical standard? That's kind of number one. Number two, I look at who's involved. Are these reputable players? Are they looking to make a quick buck, or are they looking to do a long term opportunity? Obviously, I'm more interested in the long term gains. So those are the two kind of loose items that I look at. The next thing is that how is the deal structured? Are they trying to look at federal players? Are they only looking at commercial payers? And that pretty much allows me to stratify the deals that I want to be involved with. I do not get involved with kind of federal program patients for obvious reasons.
And for our audience, I think some of those obvious reasons we can talk about in the second half. But definitely, I would say even when you are looking at these deals, what are some of the returns that they talk about that you may get, or what are some returns that you look for?
Well, I've seen, there's a wide array of options given. Some are more aggressive, and some are very conservative. Usually, the ones that seem highly lucrative on the front end may not be, because they tend to be over promising and under delivering. I'm really looking for opportunities that are realistic and transparent. That's probably the biggest thing. I don't like surprises, and especially when we're talking about legal entities.
Yeah, and so when it comes to deals, do you feel now more comfortable with real estate deals, or is it any deal that comes across your desk is something you'd consider, but you don't have a preference?
I think that I would look into. I look at any situation because there can be merit in any, but ultimately once you start pulling back the layers, then you'll find the truth. I'm not going into any opportunity without getting it vetted legally And part of that legal vetting is not just is it legally sound, but is it kind of structurally sound? And so that's where a partnership with you guys is actually very helpful. So I haven't done any deals that I haven't let you guys see first. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean every deal is going perfect, but you've seen everyone.
I'm curious too, because you've seen a lot of deals. Have you kind of picked up on any indicators that make you identify if the people on the other side are people that you shouldn't be doing business with?
Yeah, I think that probably the biggest thing goes back to my upbringing. And my grandfather used to always say two things. Number one, there's no free lunch. And if it sounds too good to be true, it is. And so usually when I'm coming across a deal that is not going to be great, I kind of get a sense or a sensation that, hey, this is not quite right. So I'm not sure I can pinpoint an exact thing, but it's a feeling. And the deals that I have done that haven't gone well, usually I've kind of pushed that feeling aside. So I think it's important to kind of listen to your gut, because your gut is usually telling you the right thing.
Fascinating. Yeah. Well, I'm so grateful that you came on today. And what we'll do, Dominique, is after we'll let you go here in just a second, and we'll go to a commercial. And then after Brad and I will come back after commercial and kind of get into it without trying to put everyone to sleep, some of the legal analysis behind evaluating these deals. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Many business owners use legal counsel as a last resort rather than as a proactive tool that can further their success. Why? For most, it's the fear of unknown legal costs. ByrdAdatto's Access Plus program makes it possible for you to get the ongoing legal assistance you need for one predictable monthly fee. That gives you unlimited phone and email access to the legal team, so you can receive feedback on legal concerns as they arise. Access Plus, a smarter, simpler way to access legal services. Find out more. Visit ByrdAdatto.com today.
Well, welcome back to the second half. We're still with the Legal 1-2-3s with ByrdAdatto, and Michael Byrd, myself, are still here. Now, Michael, Dominique was throwing a lot of stuff at us. Let's kind of see if, what are some of your initial thoughts?
My initial thought is I'm curious, Brad. I want to hear more about this deal, the imaging deal that he talked about, and just I don't know. I want to hear more about that story.
Yeah, and he raised some good points. If you heard what he was saying, which I liked about how he was kind of break it down, is he gets very nervous, like a lot of physicians when they start hearing about, and I'll use the word, he didn't use it, but the commingling of federal payer patients with commercial payers. So in this particular deal, again, no names involved. A lot of times when someone shows up, they'll sell you on one thing, much like Fyre. It's just like, hey, doc, this is a deal in which we're going to have just commercial payers. We have vetted the process. So long as you do A, B, and C, you can invest in this imaging deal and you're fine. And so a lot of times, like a lot of deals, when it first started, that was a compliant way. Of course, I'm generalizing here, but there are a lot of ways in certain states that you as a physician can invest in those deals. And it has to do with with your ownership and how you're buying in and fair market value. There's a lot of pieces that go into that. The moment someone injects federal payers into it, so in this particular deal, they came back to Dominique later and said, hey, we want to shift this. And now we also want to use the exact same facility at the exact same time to also have federal payers going through the exact same facility, and except it's just a different entity. And so that had a host of issues that came with it. One is with if the same federal patients happen to come from any of those physicians, not just Dominique, but any physician, that can mess up the entire deal. Imaging centers themselves are a licensed facility, licensed by a state. And that license is not transferable back and forth over and over again. So the same entity that had one license was allowing two different entities to use it, one being a federal payer and one being commercial payer. So that opened itself to billing issues. And I would say, Dominic did say something that was important was as soon as he saw that, he just didn't think it sounded right. And so luckily, he reached out to his counsel, and in his case, his counsel's awesome. That he realized that,
This is not a comedy podcast, Brad.
oh, sorry, my bad. But he realized, going what he said, his gut, something just didn't seem right about it. And that allowed him the details matter in this one that, big, as he said, it sounded great until more details came out and they started trying to restructure it. And so he's like, I don't want to be a part of something like that. So very, very, good decision making on his perspective.
So I guess number one, he was in the deal and then they changed it.
Yeah. So he was in a legal deal, and then they came back and said, hey, Dominic, we want to change this deal. And that's when he hit the pause button in his case and said, well, I want to learn these details and I want counsel involved. And then when he heard the details, he said, I don't want to have anything to do with this. This doesn't sound right.
And were there mechanisms in the deal that he had signed to allow him to get out when he wanted to get out?
Yeah.
Oh, because of his great counsel?
Yeah.
His amazing counsel, I think is what you said.
Well, I didn't say it was me. I just said it was amazing. So
You strongly implied it.
I was going to say it was Jay Riero, but if you think it was me, I appreciate that.
Okay, well, are there any other details you think people should consider when they're, looking at deals like this?
Yeah, a lot of in a lot of healthcare arrangements, we always say, depending on the deal, there's so many different pitches, and so you hear these big picture, like as we were talking about, hey doc, invest in this ASC or the lab or this imaging center in his case. And so on a high level, it sounds great. I mean, it sounds like it's going to be amazing, but this season, we really want to talk about zooming in and actually understanding the details. So I'll give you an example, Michael, is he said it, which is great, because this is what we always say, talk to us about what type of payers are involved in the arrangement. Do we have federal payers or state payers? So like Medicare, Medicaid, or even TRICARE. We call these program payers.
Okay, well, I think we have our first vocabulary word of the day, payer. I don't think everyone knows what that is, Brad. And so what we're talking about, and most of it, this would be intuitive, and for some of you already obviously know it, but a payer is a third party that pays or reimburses for the treatment of a patient. So it could be, as you said, Medicare, Medicaid, or on the private side, something like, United or Blue Cross Blue Shield, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. And what matters, Michael, is when you do have these program payers, this will trigger federal laws versus state laws. And so what federal laws, and we've talked about these, so I won't go into detail, but heavily, but we have the Stark Law, which is a federal anti-referral law. We have the anti-kickback laws. We have other fraud and abuse laws. And so the moment you hear that a program payer or federal payer is involved, it makes everyone hit the pause button.
Yeah. I mean, the stakes are orange jumpsuit when you're talking federal law.
Yes.
And here's kind of the corollary to that we hear, and something I heard as a baby healthcare lawyer, which is this idea that, oh, well, then let's just carve out program patients and not do that, and you can do whatever you want. Is that true?
No.
Oh,
sorry. You heard that probably correctly, even though it's not correct. So a lot of people say, if I don't have federal payers and state payers involved, I just have commercial payers like the Blues or Aetna's, United's, and they're just paying for the service, it's fine. And that's not always the case. Yes, you can still do legal transactions, but you have to still meet with certain laws involving those. And they are states like California or Florida that have their own version of baby Stark laws when it comes to ownership of diagnosis centers or other things like that.
And I'll add another element that is a common question. Well, what if it's elective medicine and the patient's only paying with cash? So there's no insurance company involved. Well, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to know, just need to understand that many of the state laws are what they call payer indifferent laws. In other words, cash also brings those state laws into play, and so you can still have restrictions on ownership if you're a physician.
Great point, Michael. As usual.
Yeah, I knew that you would send me that compliment. Thank you, Brad.
Mm-hmm.
Before we go in, go on from this episode, our theme this year is zoom in. And so what other details should our audience consider?
So the last detail, I'll have a big picture answer with details.
I'm not sure if that is a possible answer, but I do speak Brad, so let's run with it.
All right, follow me here. First big picture. Dominique said this, which is if the deal sounds too good to be true, it probably is because it's not compliant. And so so that's the big picture piece. So here what are the details? So I'll give you an example. You invest $10,000 to have ownership in this company. And after the first month of owning it, you get a $30,000 distribution. And so this deal seems suspect under the eyes of most states and federal governments, because who in their right minds in a typical arm's length transaction will sell you ownership of their business that basically within the first month you make you 3 times what you just paid into the business?
And I mean, here's, for those that are not familiar with this world, they're seeing through the fact that they're basically saying, we're going to do this for you, doctor, because we want you to refer your patients. And that's the currency that they're really hoping to get out of it. And that's what the regulators are going to say, that's what they're going to enforce.
Yeah, and one more detail on that one, Michael, it's a good point, is that if they ever say, doc, you don't have to pay anything, you just have to refer patients and we'll give you 5% ownership. And then after that, you could buy in more. That the after part's irrelevant, because if they're just giving you ownership because you agree to exclusively refer patients to them, that tends to be a big issue for patient buying, anti-solicitation rules, anti-kickback rules. So again, hit that pause button and say, wow, that seems like, why would they do that? Always ask your question, would they give that same exact deal to your barber, to your attorney, or they're just giving it to you because you're a doc? Although doctors are awesome, because we both have dads, they're doctors, so we're not saying you're not awesome. But even then, you got to remember, it's just a true arm's length transaction.
Wow, that actually makes sense, Brad. Well done.
All right, Michael, let's hit that pause button one more time before we go today. Let's zoom in and talk about some specific actions our audience should consider with these types of healthcare arrangements.
Well, you said it, and we've said it in a number of different ways, but I would say it like this. Understand where you want to hit the pause button. Number one, if you're a physician, you're going to get opportunities. And if some aspect of that is that you're going to be referring patients into wherever you're going to be investing, definitely hit the pause button. And hitting the pause button means go get healthcare counsel to approve the deal, because you don't know what the stakes are. But we do know in healthcare they can be orange jumpsuit type stakes. And that's actually worse than being stuck on an island eating a cheese sandwich for a weekend. It actually goes longer than that if you're in jail.
This is so true. Great point, Michael. So, audience, join us next Wednesday when we discuss concierge medicine, music to your ears.
ByrdAdatto is providing this podcast as a public service. This podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute legal advice, nor does it establish an attorney-client relationship. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by ByrdAdatto. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Please consult with an attorney on your legal issues.